All right, welcome back. Mr. Bashir Yusuf joins us next. He is a former chairman of the Inter-Party Advisory Council, IPAC. He joins us from our studios in Kano. Good morning, and thank you for joining us on the program today. Quite a number of issues that are playing out that needs to be addressed, with some concerns being raised about them. Well, much as we see that narrative about vote buying, which we'll come to in a moment, or we might as well even look at it right now. So for you, when we talk about addressing vote buying, which is being raised in different quarters, what comes to your mind? Because we know that on the day of elections, scenarios play out. Even before the elections, there are certain scenarios too that can be interpreted as vote buying. So if you could just give us your own perspective of how you think we should be approaching this matter.
Well, thank you. Good morning, viewers. Well, you see, when people allow themselves to be induced by collecting money to sell their votes or their PVCs, these are people who are desperate people, who are very poor. Why do we live in a society whereby people have to be forced to make a choice between their liberty and their daily lives? Because when somebody collects 2,000 naira or even 200 naira to sell his votes, that person must be a very, very desperate person. We are unfortunately looking at the symptom of the problem, not the disease itself. The disease is poverty. People take a look at what government is able to deliver to them, and look at also the value of the money they collect on election day, and make a choice to say that, well, I'd rather just collect this up front instead of waiting for promises that never actually come. So I'm not trying to justify the fact that people are selling their votes. I'm just saying that we have created a society in which people are so desperate that they felt compelled to make a choice between their liberty or their future and their today and now. And that's the proper definition of desperation. So unless we solve those two key problems, one, the problem of poverty, and two, that when governments, when politicians make a promise, that they actually deliver. I mean, if you promise me something and I'm so certain that at the end of the day, what you promise me will not come through, I mean, if I'm so desperate as to have to resort to selling my vote so that I can survive today instead of waiting for a promise that will never come in the future, why not? I mean, so actually we are grandstand over these issues. Everybody wants to pontificate, and a desperate person who has to survive on a day-to-day basis, I mean, you need to be in their shoes in order to know why people actually sell their votes.
Let me ask you, now, different vote buying may mean different things for different people, because when those summits and different meetings held in different fora, there are those who may just think this has got to do with the day of election proper. But some others think not. They think it's beyond that. So perhaps for you, you could just tell us, when do you think vote buying starts, or what constitutes vote buying?
Vote buying is an exchange for money of your liberty to choose your leaders during an election. And this mostly happens on election day, when people actually line up, in some cases, on two parallel lines. One is for voting, and the other one is for selling of the vote itself. And this happens in the full glare of security agencies. And I mean, so although there may be some form of vote buying ahead of the elections, in the sense that people tend to distribute, you know, essential materials and commodities and textile and all sorts of items to induce people. But the actual arena for the buying of the vote happen on election day, where people line up ahead of voting to collect money. Sometimes the queue for collecting the money is much longer than the queue for voting. And people come early enough. And I'm telling you this because, I mean, I have been part of this system for a very long time. I know what happens. As you have introduced me, I was the chairman of Inter-Party Advisory Council. So I am very, very familiar with how these things take place. And it's very sad that in the 21st century that citizens put in a position whereby they make a choice between their liberty and their daily livelihoods.
Well, clearly the election day is very critical, but if you could just give us a scenario, that picture of what transpires on election day concerning vote buying, what to you do you think is the most critical component that needs to be addressed on that particular day, election day, to stem this vote buying menace?
We can try to minimize it by deploying enough manpower, security manpower on election day to make sure that the vote buying queue does not take root. But you know, politicians have a variety of means of doing this. Even getting the vote out, some people send out buses to actually pick voters, and they pay them along the way before they get to the polling booth. And sometimes the vote buying is done through agents, okay, not directly between the voter and the party or the candidate that is contesting for election. There are middlemen sometimes that perform that role. So it's a very, very desperate situation. And I keep going back to the issue of addressing that root cause, the desperation that pushes people to engage in this kind of unfortunate behavior. And we lay the blame mostly on the victim. And who is the victim? The actual victim is the guy who sells his vote, okay? And we lay the blame mostly on them. Why don't we ask ourselves, what pushes them to do this? I mean, do we actually deliver the services that they vote us to deliver? Then after delivering the service, they still go and sell their votes, okay? Do we create an atmosphere or an economy which provides people with a decent source of sustenance that prevents them or gives them some sense of pride to feel that they are beneath, or beyond, or above selling their votes? So, it takes two to tango. We need to really also ask ourselves, what role do we play? If you have enough security on voting day, I don't know if you can have enough security to checkmate 70% of your population that live below the poverty line. That is represented also in the voter population. About 70% of those who vote are also desperately poor people. So I don't know if we can have enough security to prevent them from making that choice on election day, but we can minimize it. And the cost of doing that also is very, very prohibitive. Why don't we just do the right thing the first time, make sure that we provide average citizens with the kind of services that they require, so that they don't have to collect those, because they put a price to that vote on that day. To say that, how much am I willing to collect? Yeah. Go ahead, yeah.
I was going to say, I have quite a number of questions swirling in my head right now, but let's first of all tackle the incentive for the voter. Because some people will say that if a party promised to do something in a previous election and fails in that decision, and then the elections come in, they begin to campaign again and perhaps think that vote buying is what will solve the problem. Well, some people also argue that the opposition also takes part in this vote buying business. But if this is supposed to be an incentive, isn't the failure, assuming that the party in power at whatever jurisdiction has failed at that point in time, shouldn't that be enough incentive for the voter, to be able to take a decision?
Well, for people like you and I who can wait for 4 years, Yeah, that's one of the incentives. For example, I can afford not to collect anything and then try to punish the party down the line by not voting for it. But for a desperate person, I mean, who lives day to day and who lives hand to mouth, that's purely theoretical. And sometimes also it is because of lack of choice. I mean, if you give us two candidates that do not represent anything different, like the parties actually don't represent anything different, I mean, what do I lose if you vote one candidate or the other? I mean, so, I mean, I might not even stay at home if the candidates presented to me do not represent real choice. So I may well stay at home. But for those who feel that they can come to the polling booth and collect some stipend instead of staying at home, that's an option for them. So we, like I said, we pontificate so much because we are so comfortable. The kind of desperation and the kind of deprivation that is taking place at that level of polling booth, I mean, it's unimaginable. And you need to really go, and the politicians know it. That's why they use the money as an incentive. They know that people are very, very desperate. And sometimes they actually create that situation of desperation and then come back to benefit from it by buying the votes.
You've spoken to an incentive. I mean, that's oftentimes, you know, people would rather stay at home. Some politicians will argue that perhaps what they're trying to do is make sure that people come out to vote. But to your mind, because before now, what we had to also deal with were polls that were not credible. Do you think that there is enough awareness, perhaps enough, how do I put this now? Yeah, enough awareness, enough education about how the process is changing, how the voters' votes really count, and that should perhaps also incentivize the voter to come out and vote if he or she believes that there is a real choice?
Well, to be fair, since 1999, the quality of our elections has been improving. Not as much as we'd want, but improving nonetheless. And therefore, I agree with you, as we continue to improve the elections, and that force politicians who get to public office to know that the voters, the power of the vote counts, and then they themselves try to ameliorate the situation of the citizen, then that, the more that happens, the less the incentive for people to begin collecting money in order to sell their votes. Part of it is the powerlessness that the average or the ordinary voter feels that his vote represents, that even when he votes, that does he really get what he votes for? And even when he gets what he votes for, does it in the end reward him? I mean, does the person or the party he votes for, does it actually deliver on its promise? So as the quality of elections improve, I have no doubt in my mind that this tendency for people to sell their votes will decrease. And I must say that the 2023 election is going to be substantially and significantly more qualitative, I think, than the elections before it, because of the safeguards that have been put in place. I've been following what INEC has been trying to do, and I must commend the Commission for its doggedness and its determination to improve the quality of our elections in 2023.
My colleague already took you up on the process, especially before and on the day. From what you have witnessed, from how the polling unit is set up, from how things are generally arranged on the day, and even the processes that INEC is putting in place, what areas would you like, whether the security agencies or INEC, to focus on to be able to de-incentivize this vote buying?
I think maybe if we can, because our elections take place and we have almost now 100 and almost 100 million votes. I mean, I can't remember the exact figure of our voters register. And the elections take place in a very tight, within a very tight schedule. I mean, the voting takes place within a very tight schedule. I think we should increase the number of hours so that so many people don't get to the polling station at the same time, because with the kind of confusion that takes place within that kind of period, that also creates the atmosphere and the kind of environment that we'd like to avoid, which facilitates some of this criminal activity perpetrated by people who buy votes. So I think one of the things INEC should look into is to increase the hours that it takes to vote on election day, so that people can trickle in and vote and go back, so that we don't have massive crowds around polling stations. And when those massive crowds happen, the security agents lose control, the election officials lose control, and so much of these nefarious activities take place by taking advantage of the crowd.
Well, today, IPAC is quoted to have said that the governors are trying to ruin this 2023 general elections by muzzling opposition in their states. And so they're crying out, saying something needs to be done about that. Now, from your perspective, how should we begin to address this challenge, as IPAC is alleging now?
Well, I don't know the evidence that IPAC has at its disposal to make such a very strong allegation. But it's normal during elections for parties in power to make it tough for the opposition. And the same everywhere in the world. But there is a certain acceptable threshold. And if that threshold is breached, then probably it's good that IPAC has sounded this alarm. You see, when we make public office so attractive, we provide the incentive for parties in power to go, to do all sorts of things, to put all sorts of pressure on the opposition. But you see, it's a marketplace. Elections and a democracy in general is like a marketplace. When you go to the market, you have your shop and you display your wares. But at the same time, markets are also avenues for thieves to come and steal from legitimate businessmen. So it's your duty as the opposition to actually be very vigilant and mobilize around your program and around your candidate to have such enormous presence in your constituency to make it difficult, if not impossible, for ruling parties to intimidate you or your followers. It's not easy.
All right, so let's wind down. All right, let's wind down with this one. For some elections now, remember during Jaga's time and this time for the last general elections, the time for the elections was shifted owing to some challenges. And I do remember that the chairman of INEC at the time said we needed to have a conversation about election management. And now with all of this focus, responsibility for the commission and everybody else, do you think that the electoral body is overburdened with some of these responsibilities such that we need to have that conversation which you referred to, such that, who knows, we could have some other bodies or some other agencies take the load off INEC?
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a very important question. I have been at the vanguard of this agitation for INEC to be unbundled, because INEC is just doing too many things. INEC is essentially an election management body, but we also expect INEC to secure our elections. We expect INEC to stop vote buying. I listened in on the conversation you were having before this segment of the program, and one of the anchors of the program nailed it by saying that, look, INEC is doing just too many things, and that's where we need to look into to really unbundle INEC and make it a trim and efficient organization such that it concentrates mainly on election management and leave other responsibilities to other agencies. Although I also, ironically also, I'm not a supporter of the proliferation of so many agencies. And around elections now, we are creating trying to create several other agencies. Why are elections so burdensome that we need to create so many institutions in order to deliver them? So I think the first step, I agree, is to unbundle INEC, but also we need to look into why do elections become so challenging for us as Nigerians that we need to create so many institutions in order to manage them.
Food for thought, I reckon. Well, that is where we let it go. We do appreciate your time this morning. Bashir Yusuf, former chairman, Inter-Party Advisory Council, IPAC. He joined us from our studios in Kano.
Thank you very much.
All right. We will be back in just a moment. We've got one more lap to go with some politicians. So keep it here with us. We'll be right back.